Welcome. Welcome, everybody. See everyone's coming into the webinar. Welcome to day 3 of our 5th biannual Blueprint Leadership Summit, a meeting of the top leadership minds and luminaries in the business space, brought to you by Conant Leadership. We're so happy to have you all with us on this lovely Administrative Professionals Day. We are thrilled today to welcome 2 incredible keynote panelists, Hiatt and Low-Kramen, who will be talking all about an extremely timely topic in today's world, the executive assistant as strategic partner. But as always, before we jump in, I'll tell you a little bit about the Blueprint Summit, about Conant Leadership, cover a few housekeeping items, and formally introduce our host, Doug Conant, and our guest, and then we'll be on our way. First, I'm Amy Federman, Conant Leadership's editor-in-chief and director of content and co-author with Doug Conant of the Wall Street Journal bestseller, The Blueprint, 6 Practical Steps to Lift Your Leadership to New Heights. And I'll be helping to moderate the Q&A portion of today's program. Always, we take a moment here to welcome anyone who is engaging with Conant Leadership for the first time today. This next couple minutes will be very familiar if this is not your first day attending the summit. But for those of you who are new, a brief intro to what we're all about. Conant Leadership's mission is championing leadership that works in the 21st century. Our mission is about making meaning, not money. Our founder and host today, Doug Conant, takes no salary, and all profits after covering our operating costs are donated to enlightened organizations whose leadership is moving the world forward. We offer free resources like this summit as part of our larger high-impact suite of leadership resources and training. This summit you're joining today, a free week-long special event, is inspired by the leadership wisdom in its namesake, The Blueprint, but it's not contained by it. An important part of the Blueprint book, if you're familiar, is the idea that your life story is your leadership story. The more anchored you are in who you are, what you believe, and why you are called to leadership, the more fully you are able to show up for your organization and inspire people, no matter what turbulence swirls around you. And it's always swirling around, as you know. You'll find that each of our speakers this week and today brings that message to life in their own unique way. If you'd like to learn more about the Blueprint, my colleague has dropped a link to a brief Blueprint intro video in the chat that you can copy and watch later at your convenience. Some quick housekeeping about today's Q&A. If you think of a question for our panelists at any time, simply type it into the Q&A box. It's in the bottom center of your Zoom screen. When we get to the Q&A portion of the program, I'll ask our panelists your submitted questions. And while we can never get to them all, we really do try to get to as many as we can. If you're using the chat feature, please know I won't be able to moderate comments or questions there, but my colleague, Conant Leadership Chief of Staff, Margaret Rudkin, will be monitoring that chat, just in case you have any technical questions about the Zoom webinar. But to ask our panelists questions, the Q&A box is the correct place to do that. Next, it's my pleasure to introduce our host today, Conant Leadership founder and CEO, Doug Conant. Doug Conant is the only former Fortune 500 CEO who is a New York Times and Wall Street Journal bestselling author, a top 50 leadership innovator, a top 100 leadership speaker, and a top 100 most influential author in the world. He has served as president of Nabisco Foods, president and CEO of Campbell's Soup Company, and chairman of Avon Products. He is also chairman of CECP, that's Chief Executives for Corporate Purpose, and serves on the board of the Partnership for Public Service. And he's served on countless for-profit and nonprofit boards throughout his 45-plus-year career. Finally, I'm delighted to introduce our guests, Hiatt and Low-Kramen, and there will be additional information in the links Mara will share in the chat box. Low-Kramen, the author of the new book, Staff Matters, People-Focused Solutions for the Ultimate New Workplace, is a celebrity personal assistant turned entrepreneur and business owner who now employs her own executive assistant. For 25 years, Low-Kramen worked with Oscar-winning actress Olympia Dukakis. 10 years ago, she left this dream job to take on a new role, traveling the world teaching and speaking. Until the pandemic, she had worked in 14 countries and 38 states. Her students have included the assistants to Bill Gates and the staffs of British Parliament, Starbucks, and Amazon. In 2016, she delivered 2 presentations at the Barron's Team Conference in Las Vegas. Bonnie is one of the most respected leaders in the administrative profession. As such, she is at the center of the movement to end workplace bullying and to close the wage gap. Hiatt, the author of Bet on Yourself, Recognize, Own, and Implement Breakthrough Opportunities, is founder and CEO of Hiatt Consulting, where she is a leadership strategist and catalyst for visionary change makers. She is a Silicon Valley veteran who received her initial business training during 15 years as the executive business partner to Amazon CEO Jeff Bezos and as chief of staff to Eric Schmidt, CEO and executive chairman at Google. Now, Anne consults with executives and companies across the globe to reverse engineer their moonshot goals and get results by applying the lessons she learned at Amazon and Google, lessons of innovation, ambition, growth at scale, and forward-thinking leadership. Anne is a sought-after international speaker, angel investor, and sits on several boards in the UK. And now I will turn it over to our host, Doug Conant.
Wow, you guys are impressive. My goodness. Now, before I get into this, I'm going to do a little quiz with our audience that Amy and Mira and you don't know about. And that is, I'm going to be asking the audience, and you can put it in the chat or the Q&A. Does anybody know when National Administrative Professional Day first was initiated? You don't have to answer. I'll tell you the answer. It started in 1942 during World War II, when all of a sudden they realized we can't run this country without administrative assistance. We've got a war. We actually had a declining birth rate. We need brilliant leaders in these positions in order to make the country work. Well, in 1955, Secretary of Commerce Charles Sawyer created National Secretaries Day. That was the first week of June. In 1981, it was changed to Professional Administrators Week. And then in 2000, it became the last Wednesday in the week of April and that was 42 years ago, or that it was named in 1981. So in that spirit, I want to acknowledge my three administrative assistants, in particular, Diana Hansen, who is the one who put this whole thing together and is making Bonnie and Anne and Amy and Mira and I look so good. So Diana Hansen, we thank you. We appreciate you. I've worked with her as a CEO at Campbell and now 12 years in this role. Prior to her, I had an opportunity to work with a woman by the name of Sally Collins, who is still a dear friend and retired in North Carolina. Prior to her, when I was president of Nabisco Foods, I worked with Kim DeSoy, who is now also retired. I guess I should be retired, who is also retired now in Richmond, Virginia. And I know firsthand, I did not have the bandwidth to do my work absent people like those three people who made everything go. So I get it. I'm sold hook, line, and sinker. Now I have one more story and then we're going to get into it. I have another quiz. Does anybody know who Margaret Fogarty is? No, I've got you on that one. She was born in 1897 and she went on to, she grew up on Long Island and was valedictorian of her high school class, but really had no opportunities for women at that point in time. She became a bank teller and an administrative assistant, ultimately married a stockbroker in 1923. And then the stock market crash hit. Fortunately, they had bought this little farm in what is now Fairfield, Connecticut, and they could ultimately live there because they lost everything. And they were living on this farm where they planted two trees right in front, two Pepperidge trees. And those trees named the property. It ultimately became Pepperidge Farm. And this woman, who is now Margaret Rudkin, started the Pepperidge Farm Company. She had never baked a loaf of bread in her life. Her son had allergies, asthma, and could not eat bread with preservatives or allergens. She invented allergy-free bread. And she had never baked, but she was a brilliant person. Ultimately, she built Pepperidge Farm into a formidable world-class company, which it still is today, owned by Campbell Soup, and was the CEO there for 30 years. Now, here's the rest of the story that you won't find published anywhere. When I was CEO of Campbell, and she had been on our board of directors, the first female on our board of directors starting in 1961, her personal assistant, her personal assistant came to our shareholder meetings. He was about 90. He would come with his wife. And I got to know him. I mean, they could barely walk, and they were still coming to our meetings. And I said, what made her so special? And he said, she knew what was going on. She had been an assistant. She knew that what was going on up here was not what was going on across the organization. And she knew how to use me to help her run the company. She was tuned in. And that's the way I felt with the people that I had an opportunity to work with. We were so much better together than we were apart. Now I'm going to say one thing to Bonnie, and then I'm going to turn to Ann. But Bonnie, I'm going to be interested if you, in your book, which we'll talk about in a minute, I'm going to ask you to share your two ahas that you had in your book. One, which was your speech in London, where you had the people raising their hands.
Yeah. Oh, I know exactly what you're talking about.
And the other one was that study you mentioned in the book about when people were starting to develop their leadership training, at what age, which was astounding to me. So we're headed to you. But before we get there, I'm going to come to Ann. And Ann's written this terrific book about recognize, own, and implement breakthrough opportunities. What I love about this book, Ann, is that you go to implementation. I'm a business guy. I've run companies for 40 years. A lot of the work we see in leadership is about ideas and concepts, but you don't get down to the brass tacks. Okay, what am I going to go do on Monday? You get it. You talk about implementing these ideas, recognizing them, then owning them, and then doing stuff, implementing them. And you talk about taking charge of your career, creating a life of learning, adventure, joy, and success. And what really worked with me and is consistent with the book that Amy and I wrote is you talk about the implementation of daily habits and practices that can bring to life this aspiration, as well as acknowledging you also have long game strategies. With that as background, I'd love to hear kind of what motivated you to sort of write the book, and how did it get into these, how did you get all the way to the practical, away from the theoretical?
Yeah. Oh, thank you for that summary. Nothing thrills me more than to hear what jumps out at different readers. So thank you for sharing your top takeaways. Look, I was an unwilling author. If I'm honest with you, it took a long time for me to decide that this was the book I needed to write. I was unwilling in the beginning because I had the misconception that if people wanted to learn of and adopt the best practices of Jeff Bezos and Eric Schmidt and Google and Amazon and all these larger than life characters, those books already existed. But when I really realized that I had a unique perspective that wasn't yet represented, and that I uniquely could translate the best practices of these super performers for the rest of us normal people. And in the book, I use my career just as a case study because I think I'm unexceptional in the best ways. I feel like I could take their lessons, and I adopted how they were running the company and the organizations, how they were taking risks and learning line upon line through trial and error. I adopted that into my own individual career. So the reason why I wanted to write it was to help people, regardless of their background, their current title, whatever their individual goals are, to adopt these best practices and make their biggest dreams come true, no matter whether someone who looks like them or comes from where they come from has done what they're dreaming of doing. So that's my end goal in this book. I just feel like my career has been such a wild privilege. I've had this incredible bespoke business school by sitting next to some of the greatest minds of our generation for several decades. Yeah. And it's my personal mission now to get that into as many brains as possible and wake people up to the concept that they too can be an entrepreneur. You might be an intrapreneur within an organization, but you can adopt these best practices of entrepreneurship that I was raised in.
Well, and it shows. Perhaps you could give me an example of the kind of daily habit kind of things that you talk about that would
Yeah.
sort of bring this to life for our readers and our viewers?
So I think this is where I really got a masterclass from Jeff Bezos and Eric Schmidt, because they do this better than anyone else, where what they do first is they create this big vision. They define for themselves, what does success look like? And I feel like not enough of us do that on an individual basis. We're so reactionary to the endless to-do list or the requests of everyone around us, the demands on our time, but to be really purposeful in how we're spending our time, our resources, and our influence. So that's the first step of recognize what it is. How do you define success for yourself? Owning it means then saying out loud what that goal is, setting some accountability around it, and then implementing that plan. So an easily accessible example of that is a question I get a lot, especially from the administrative professional community, which is, how do I up-level my authority in the room? How do I teach people how to treat me? How do I teach them how to engage with me so that I can rise to my skill level and also advance in my knowledge, my expertise, my network, and my industry reputation? And I really did that line upon line in a non-exceptional way, but I was very purposeful in how I did it. So in the beginning, I was really nervous around these. Jeff Bezos had already been Time Magazine's Person of the Year in 1999. He was this celebrity, not yet the space cowboy version that he is today, but he was this very intimidating figure. So I started testing out my knowledge by, after I left a meeting, I would go to my manager, John, and say, okay, I understood X, Y, and Z are going well. I have questions about this concept. And I would kind of test my knowledge and learning with him outside of the room. Once I felt like I had a good compass and that my questions were right and were valuable, then I started to get brave enough to say them in the room, ask a clarifying question so that these brilliant minds in the room could then really hone in on what was to be resolved. Then eventually, once I was at Google and at a more senior level and understood the industry better, that's when you can move into the proactive phase. You've seen patterns a couple of times before. You can kind of anticipate what might be coming, the needs of your team, and you can raise those issues in advance so that you can accelerate the successes of your team. And then once you get to the chief of staff level, it's very much about not just solving problems that are underfoot today or over the next few months, but anticipating where's the entire industry moving, what emerging technologies are going to disrupt us, and how can we get ahead of that and even use that to our advantage. So that's just one small example of how you can learn line upon line and really increase your leadership qualities, your opportunities to work on projects outside your job description, and really teach people how to engage with you most effectively.
Yeah, well, and the challenge, and Bonnie, we're headed your way, so fasten your seatbelt. The challenge is to have the courage to wade into the deeper water, and we all need. It's not easy for any of us to go into uncharted waters with people who we work for and with and sort of ask questions, and without fear of asking a stupid question or being discounted from there on out because you asked a poor question. So what we find is, if you can get really well anchored in who you are and how you want to move forward, independent of this, if you're comfortable with yourself, you'll be more comfortable in those situations, and you'll have more courage. But what we're finding is you got to be very comfortable with who you are first, as opposed to just taking cues from the world around you, which is not necessarily built to be encouraging.
Well said.
Bonnie, we're headed your way, and I know everything Ann just said. I saw you nodding. You get it.
Oh, yeah.
I'm curious to know. Now, you wrote Staff Matters, and it's just been published. And you talk about people-focused solutions for the ultimate new workplace. Ann's talking about a new workplace too. It's probably an old workplace for technology, but it's a new workplace for all the rest of us. And you had a couple of ahas when you wrote this book that I found that were ahas for me. When you talked about your speech in London, your first international speech, I believe, and someone was asking people to raise their hands if they felt they were being fully utilized, and you were sadly disappointed that so few people raised their hands. Do you want to elaborate on that experience and your other aha?
Yeah, as I stood at the back of the room with 250 executive assistants who are at very high levels, listening to the speaker ask, how many of you feel well managed? And I was able to see most, if anyone raised their hand at all, it was very kind of haphazardly, half-hearted. Very few people did this. Yes, I absolutely feel well managed. And I remember thinking, what is going on here? That's a problem, because by then, by 2012, I had been speaking with a lot of executive assistants in the United States and online around the world. And I went back to the United States determined to find out what was going on. So that London experience was the aha moment, number one. Number two is when I started doing the research, I found an article that literally changed the way I teach, because I share the story pretty much every workshop I do. And the article from Harvard Business Review is called "We Wait Too Long to Train Our Leaders" by Jack Zenger. And Jack he and his team polled over 70,000 leaders around the world and figured out that the average age that the leader gets their very first training in managing people was a shocking 42 years old. And in my mind, that it was like, oh my gosh, that explains it. That's it. That's the reason. It's not that leaders are trying to be mean or not helpful to their staff, but they simply are suffering from a lack of education.
Yeah.
They simply don't know, in many cases, the right and wrong ways to retain people, to get the best work from people, to motivate them. And then another shocker was that in 2021, during the pandemic, Jack and his team repeated the poll, and the average age has gone up to age 46. So the situation has gotten even worse. And the executive assistants of the world are responding and having to be in this situation with executives all over the world. And when they know that data point, it helps them manage their managers. It helps them have a framework, because in many cases, executive assistants suffer from a lack of education. And now we're realizing so do leaders. I dug into the curriculums at business schools, and that class, in many cases, how to manage people, what to do with assistants, is not in business school. Perhaps if there's any silver lining from the pandemic, it is that many curriculums at business schools are beginning to get changed, because no one prepared leaders for what happened in March of 2020.
Yeah, and that was an astounding number when I read at age 42. I did not realize it had gone up since then. Basically, and this will tie into something Ann talked about, basically our managers, our leaders, are leading sort of by the seat of their pants. And they're responding to everything that comes at them. The degree of intentionality they're bringing to their work is haphazard at best. We see people that are intentional and focused, like the people you work for, Ann, can pioneer some amazing things, but they have to have an agenda, and they have to be working that agenda with great intentionality. Most of our managers that we're exposed to are, again, working by the seat of their pants, just busy trying to respond to what's coming at them and not doing it particularly well. You layer on top of that the fact that more is coming at them than ever before. So the volume is going up, the speed at which they're expected to respond, the expectations are going up. The hierarchies that are there to support them are crumbling, and they're overwhelmed. And then we wonder why everybody's anxious and stressed out. And in the midst of all that, the administrative professionals are the ones trying to hold it all together, the unsung heroes of all of this stuff. And when you step outside of it, I've now been working at ConantLeadership for 12 years. When you step outside of it and look at it every day, you say, my goodness, how did we get here? the good news is we can find our way out, and we have wonderful examples of administrative assistants who have gone on, the Margaret Rudkins of the world, the Ann Hiatts, the Bonnie Low-Kramens, who have gone on to say, you know, I have a lot to offer here. I can add value to this conversation. I can pay all my blessings forward. I can help lift up this profession in a very worthy and very appropriate way. So
well, Doug, may I interject that, you know, the title of today is about assistants as strategic business partners. And, you know, when I first started with Olympia Dukakis in 1986, and I know there are probably a lot of people listening who weren't even born yet, but she knew that I was an important set of eyes and ears for her. And she wanted me by her side with my seat at the table and with opinions that were valued. And, you know, you both you and Anne, Doug, used the word courage, that it takes courage to speak your mind. And I was an example of an assistant who was pretty shy about speaking my mind. Profession is 95 to 97% female, and females in general are not socialized to be terribly assertive early on. We have to learn that. And so I share with my students and each of you what Olympia would say to me. She'd say, Bonnie, I may not always agree with you, and I may not always do what you say, but I always want to know what you think. And truly, I think for any leader out there, that is a really valuable thing to share with your staff. That it's not only what they do as a job description, but it's what they know and who they know. The staff knows a lot, and that's the reason I wrote Staff Matters, to reveal what the staff of the world actually does know.
How would you build on that, Anne? What's your observation?
As Bonnie was talking, I just, again, feel so grateful to have worked for executives like Olympia who recognized that value and brought it out in me. I too am naturally shy and timid by nature. And I am so grateful that they nurtured me out of that. That was not going to fly in tech. And so they really demanded, they not only tolerated ideas from anyone, but they demanded it from any level of the organization. I remember once walking the halls in Google with Eric, and we were on a very busy schedule, and an intern who quite literally, it was his first day at the company, stopped Eric with a very pointed question and a strong opinion. And that was fully embraced and encouraged. It was one of the best conversations we had that day. So they really led by that example. And so I am grateful that I saw that type of leadership modeled, and it gave me permission to really step out of my shell in a way that likely would have taken me many, many more years to evolve if I just had to do it over time. So I'm grateful for that privilege. And I now see it. I have CEO clients literally across 5 different continents now. And the number one theme of my work with them now, because I specialize in rapid growth scales of organizations and C-suite optimization. And obviously your administrative staff, I always tell my CEOs, that's the skeleton upon which your entire organization is built. Everything hangs off of that structure. And when that isn't in place or in sync, or you're not utilizing them best, you know, your great, amazing moonshot ideas now need to be reverse engineered into manageable steps. And that's what your support staff can do for you. So I couldn't agree with Bonnie more. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I will tell you, looking at it from the CEO perspective and chair perspective of 20 years, over 20 years, the staff knows the stuff you don't know. They're not going to necessarily advance the technical strategy, but you're only as good as your ability to execute. What do they say? A good strategy, well executed, beats a brilliant strategy poorly executed every time. And most companies, like the companies you work for, have the capacity with all the horsepower to create great strategies so that they can then not go do. And the staff knows what's going on, and they can help you understand your capacity to go do what you're talking about. And as a CEO, you don't want to be talking to Wall Street about what you're going to go do when the organization doesn't have the capacity to get it done. I mean, it's crazy. So there's a fellow named John. Oh gosh, I'm going to draw a blank on his name. He was the McKinsey organization specialist, and he wrote a book called The Wisdom of Teams, and I did some work with him. And he was talking to me years ago about the informal organization, not the formal organization of your direct reports and their direct reports and everybody who knows how to talk in the room. He said, there are people in your organization who, if there's ever an issue, everybody goes and talks to them. And it's none of your direct reports. It's all the people that really know what's going on. And he challenged me in that informal organization to know who they were and to find a way so that they could add value. And I found that one of those people was the administrative assistant that I was working with. And I commend this to all of our listeners here. You have informal organizations with people who really know what's going on. You can leverage that to be helpful to the people with whom you work and for whom you work. And I encourage you to do it. I want to, Bonnie, I know you worked for Olympia for a long time, but even when you were working for her, you were working to advance administrative professionals. You had the New York Celebrity Executive Assistant Group in 1996. After 10 years. In 2004, you did more work around administrative assistants. So you've been working this for a long time. If there were two things that you're seeing today that are, they've risen in importance because of the pandemic and everything else, if there are one or two things that you would say, you really got to pay attention to these things today, what would you say?
I would be urging leaders, executives, HR professionals to take a fresh look at your administrative staff and to leverage them. What I've been seeing, the trend I'm seeing in the aftermath of the pandemic and during the pandemic, because job descriptions were shaken up so drastically that it's first of all, it's vital that every staff member has an accurate, detailed, up to the minute job description for right now in 2023. But for leaders, we're experiencing a war for talent, right? I just came from a SHRM conference where the big conversation was the difficulty in hiring people, despite what we hear in tech. As you said, Doug, there are a lot of jobs available, and HR has a hard time finding those people. I would say that one of the most important trends is to look towards the administrative staff as the pipeline for those roles. We're seeing executive assistants who are getting involved in computer technology training. They're getting involved in hiring and sitting at tables, interviewing, onboarding, the creation of more robust disaster plans, because my goodness, we all know that something is going to happen again, whether it's another variant or whatever. Cybersecurity is an area, and keeping the data safe is another area where the executive assistants of the world are very talented in these areas. And it's not one size fits all. So I would urge executives and leaders to ask them, to literally ask their staff what kinds of other skills and abilities they have that they would love to use. So there's no reason to leave the organization. It's just a matter of morphing it. And the second most important thing, Doug, to answer your question, is to listen to the silence. Truly, in the writing of Staff Matters, I interviewed over 1,500 people for the book, not only assistants, but leaders, HR, recruiters, and business school professors. And this may be hard to hear for some people, but there's a lot of fear in the global workplace.
Sure.
Fear among the staff for not speaking up, in fear of repercussion, fear of backlash, fear of getting fired, fear of being labeled a troublemaker. And these are, I would generalize and say that this is even more a problem with women, given that the profession we're talking about today is dominated by females. This is a very big issue. And so my message to leaders and managers is to listen to the silence. If people are not talking, it most definitely does not mean that there's not an issue. That staff is going to be that we need to encourage our staff to say what they know in order for leaders to be fully informed as they make the decisions that Anne is guiding them to make.
Yeah, well, I would tell you in our book, in Blueprint, we talk about leading by listening. And you listen to what's being said, you also listen to what's not being said. And,
Yes,
and today, in uncharted waters of organization chaos,
yeah,
you damn well better be listening more and talking less. And listen to what's being said and not said. I love your idea of thinking about how can I expand the roles and responsibilities of my staff, and then pay them for it. So, you know, there's a win-win-win in here. The organization
Yes.
will benefit, the staff will benefit, and the leader will get more done. So easy for me to say, but I already have an A+ staff, so I don't have to worry about that.
Yeah.
But
and
Anne,
if I can
go ahead. No, go ahead.
just 30 seconds, that a solid example of what happened. There was one of my students is the assistant to a CEO in California, and in the early weeks of the pandemic, horse travel came to a screeching halt, and executive assistants found themselves with a lot of time. She got her Outlook certification, which she was super excited about. So now she is more skilled. She comes back to her CEO and offers to do a lunch and learn, which she does. And 150 people showed up at this half an hour lunch and learn. And now everybody's all excited about learning Outlook. The ROI is evident, right? Those several $100s that it costs to get her certified has now turned into her training the whole company. And now 3 years later, she's continuing to do lunch and learns, getting paid additional for each one she does. And she's essentially training the entire company. So that is one example of how the administrative staff can be leveraged, and the ROI is exponential.
Now we're preaching to leaders now, but there's a phrase that I heard, I wish I'd come up with it. They're 10 two-letter words that define the challenge here. And those 10 two-letter words are, if it is to be, it is up to me. As much as you want to wait for permission, you got to take ownership over this. You got to find a way to do it. It's not easy, but the people that can mindfully, wisely take ownership over their career and start to chart these waters, because there's not a lot of evidence that the bosses are going to see this. So to the credit of the person you just described, she went and did that, and it's opened a door for her. But the key was that she took the initiative. And I wish it wasn't this way, but you got to take the initiative at this point to move forward. I think I got to go to Anne here. Anne, I really want to know what a couple pearls of wisdom you have, given the chaos of today. What should people be really thinking about?
I love that example that Bonnie shared, and that was true in my career as well. While I worked for probably inarguably some of the best managers in the entire world, never once did any of them come to me and say, hey, Anne, I've noticed this untapped talent of yours and I've been thinking about how to utilize you. Like, that just literally never happened. However, they were the kind of leader when I identified an opportunity to contribute in a new and unexpected way. They said, yeah, let's try that. I remember a funny anecdote is I was at Google, I think it was just a year or so after I joined. So that must have been around 2007. And they were just creating what is now the chat feature within Gmail. And so the engineers, we always had a process that we called dog fooding, where we would test it on internal employees first before we launched it publicly. You have to eat your own dog food. And so they took it to the product team that I was on, and they said, okay, everyone in the product team, please add the 5 people that you go to most often every day, your go-to resources. And we're going to test out this new chat feature. 750 plus people added me as their top 5 resource that they go to every day. And we single-handedly broke chat. I love that because it got the attention of the executives because all of them are like, who is this? And actually that led to me being recruited into Eric Schmidt's office a year and a half later, because he was like, this woman is involved in everything that's important that's happening right now. And everyone already has a know, like, and trust factor with her. I didn't ask for permission for any of those things. They were UX, UI designers, they were engineers, they were product managers, every level of the organization. So I think an essential element in this, if you're looking to get brave enough to volunteer and raise your hand for something that's not within your current job description or not within your current day-to-day responsibilities, is to go back to what you referenced, Doug, which is the win-win-win formula. So the win-win-win formula is how we get a yes to a seemingly scary request. So the first element of the win is, what do I want to learn in this next phase of my career? What expertise am I developing? Maybe that example of getting Microsoft certified is a great example. So what skill set do I want to be known for? What network am I building? What reputation am I having? What kind of projects, people, teams do I want to learn? So look for that. Then the next element of the win is in what way would your manager delegating that type of project to you be a win for her as well? If she can get something off her plate that is not that's draining her rather than helping her contribute, that's a second win. And then that has to be aligned with what the priorities of the organization are at this moment. When those three things are aligned, you can get permission every time to do something outside your job description, because it checks all three of those boxes. And I think that's a very powerful and simple formula to use.
Wow. Where were you when I needed you to? I needed you to. I was a shy, introverted leader. I wasn't speaking up either. I just needed some guidance from you two. But I've got
I think you've done well for yourself.
I've stumbled through it. It took getting fired and a few other things to get there. But at any rate, we have to turn. I'm sure we've got more than a question or two that's come in. And Amy is in charge of doing this. We have about 20 minutes or so to do Q&A. Amy is sort of curating the questions, trying to figure out what am I going to ask first to who. And I'm going to let her do that. We'll invite the two of you to respond. I may chime in, or I may try and, if I can help myself, I'll stay out of it, but I probably can't. So Amy, why don't you take over?
Great. Thank you for this discussion so far. We have a ton of fantastic questions coming in. As you both spoke about having leaders who nurtured you out of your shyness and really valued your input, we had a couple questions come in like this. What if you've never worked under a supervisor or a leader that recognizes your value or knowledge and seeks your input? So we can start with Anne and then go to Bonnie for this one.
Hopefully the win-win-win formula is helpful to you. I see that all the time. So there are managers or executives who maybe aren't going to see this vision. So that's a conversation to have with yourself. Is this the right place for me to grow into what is meaningful to me in my career? I think one of the favorite things I wrote in my book is that I'm a big believer that my work needs to give as much to me as I give to it. And for me, that's a decidedly high bar. So we have to be really proactive in making that happen for ourselves, first through that clarity of what do we want, trying to get it there. If that's not available to you within your immediate manager, then maybe look for opportunities that are cross-functional. Maybe there's another manager who is really proactive and more creative and innovative thinker that will recognize your talent. And if that's not available in your current organization for politics or whatever reason, look for opportunities in the community. Maybe if you want to learn to organize big events, maybe volunteer to help organize your community marathon or something at the local library to get that kind of experience as a proof point, and then come back to your organization and say, hey, I have this new skill I'd love to utilize here. And then be really purposeful in your career. I find my career goes in 3-year sprints where I get really excited, I up level, I work on something, and then I get bored and I'm ready for the next challenge. So this is a conversation to have with ourselves over and over again. But I know Bonnie has a lot of tips around this too.
Well, thanks, Anne. I mean, it's wonderful what you just shared. I probably would begin even further back than that, though, because what I am finding is that so many executive assistants in the world are working with peers and managers and even HR professionals who don't truly understand what they do. who don't truly understand what the role is. And so step one for me would be to advise you share in writing exactly what you do. And I'm a big fan of orientations at companies for new leaders to sit down for half an hour to discuss what assistants at this company do and what can they be expected to do. Because, it doesn't matter who you are, all we get is 24 hours in a day. And it becomes, what do we do with those hours? And if leaders are not, if you don't know what you don't know, if they don't know what an assistant is capable of and what she or he is fully capable of doing, then how will they be fully leveraged? And then it comes down to offering leaders what's in it for them if they say yes to, giving access to their email inbox, saying yes to allowing an assistant to be that strategic business partner and be at a meeting, to be able to listen for themselves, to understand the context of the decisions being made, and to be literally at the table when these decisions are happening. And I know many assistants who then raise their hand and say, well, I actually have a thought about that, or I have a question about that. May I share it? May I give you some input about that? Or can I share a concern? That's my advice for the assistants of the world who want to be seen and heard. And then, when you get 9.5 times out of 10, a leader is going to say, of course, come to that meeting. Of course, it could be that they're simply not thinking of it. My advice is we need to be more proactive about being that strategic business partner.
That's great. I'm going to build on this. Obviously, I've never been an executive assistant, but I sort of have. But at any rate, I've had 28 bosses in my life, and they had 28 bosses. So I basically worked for 56 people. 5 were good. 5 were good. 51 were either mediocre, but most weren't very good. Okay. This is a malady that goes well beyond executive assistants. This goes across the whole enterprise. So understand, as an executive assistant, you're not alone in this boat. I guarantee you, if you don't know what your manager wants, the people that also report to that manager don't know either. So you're not alone. So have faith that you can pioneer here, because you're not the only one. And so I really strongly, I love your idea of, let's talk about what I do. And because most managers don't know, myself included, and we only know what we know. So I love both of you have great examples. And Amy, I'm going to turn it over to you, but I got to give credit to my friend John Katzenbach, whose name I forgot, formerly of McKinsey.
Hey, John.
John Katzenbach, one of the most gifted organization design people on the planet. He's the one who talked about informal teams, which changed my whole world in terms of, I was brought up to think about hierarchy, and then I realized it has nothing to do with hierarchy. It has to do with people. Amy, over to you.
Great, thank you. You've both talked about this a little bit, so this question will be a little bit of a build, but we have a question here from Sarah. As a business partner in my company, I'm frequently encouraging and mentoring fellow administrative assistants to own their expertise versus being task doers. Do you have any tips for how to encourage this mindset in junior to mid-level assistants and also senior level assistants who haven't quite gotten to the partnership level with their executive? We can start with you, Bonnie, and then go to Ann.
That it's about mentorship. It is about bringing teams together to share knowledge. There, Olympia used to say, Bonnie, should actually say Bonds, you really don't have to be an expert in everything, but you do need to know who the experts are to go to get the answers we need fast. Yeah. And she was right. And she was right decades ago, and she's right now. And so teams of assistants, Sarah, I hope you're with other executive assistants who can come together, monthly. They're called internal assistant networks for sharing peer-to-peer learning. And in that way, lower level, mid-level assistants get to learn from more experienced assistants. That's how it happens. This profession can be pretty lonely unless there's a coming together, the team, to share what people know. And my goodness, this workplace has never been more complicated. So it's vital. And I would say that the new hybrid remote virtual world is making that coming together a bit more challenging, but we need to do it. It is simply a challenge, but it is vital that assistants find ways to pool knowledge together, and that we have the ability to communicate and develop rapport with leadership and management. It is imperative that we have webcams on, that we be heard on our microphones, because otherwise, to have a staff that's invisible is not helpful in this new complicated workplace. Because as you said, Doug, it all comes down to the people. It doesn't matter how much technology we have out there. It all comes down to the relationships. People do things for people. And that will always be, in my view.
And you have,
I think that's the perfect answer, honestly. I think we could just mic drop right there. I couldn't agree more. I can give some anecdotes of how that played out in my career, but I feel like that is a complete
Okay.
answer.
good, thank you.
Thanks, Anne.
Amy, over to
Thank
you.
We have a question, and some of these questions obviously relate and connect. We have a question here from Heather. What recommendations do you have on, and you've spoken to this a little, on how to start the conversation with the exec or the EA on how to build a strategic partnership? Can you share some success stories? We can start with Anne.
Well, building on the principles that Bonnie just shared, when I was first starting at Google, I didn't know a soul. I had been recruited out of my PhD program. I was coming into an environment that was rapidly scaling. We doubled in the number of employees that year. We doubled in the number of daily active users. Every possible definition of doubling we did that year. So it was a bit chaotic. And as Bonnie just said, it's really about what I call friendship currency, is how you got things done then. And that remains largely true. So first you have to observe. And I feel like because most assistants, we are type A people who like to be perfect and impactful and useful at every moment of the day, we often don't give ourselves leeway that sometimes we just need to do a bit of a listening tour and really spend time building up your know, like, and trust factor up, across, and down the organization. Not enough people do it up, but I think across and down are equally important. So I share in my book a story of how I completely failed at this in my first few months at Google, where I was so overwhelmed. Marissa had not had an assistant for several months. Her past assistant had gone on emergency medical leave due to complications with her pregnancy. Her office was the biggest disaster you could imagine. So I spent the first few months just trying to unbury from this haystack of things that I had inherited, and I never got up from my desk. Google famously offers free food, 3 meals a day. I never ate any of it. I almost got bladder infections because I never even got up to go to the restroom, which was 10 feet from my desk. It was just like literally 18 hours of just buried. And then I share this story that I call the Scotch Tape story in my book, where Marissa was meant to meet with Eric Schmidt, who would later be my boss. She was the only person in that meeting who was not an SVP, but she was essential for this meeting with the CEO. Because she wasn't an SVP, she was forgotten on the invite list to this critical strategy meeting because they had just added the alias for the senior vice presidents. Marissa found out about it the day before, and Marissa was scheduled to be out of town, which never happened. It wasn't changeable. And she came to me furious, absolutely furious, which at first I felt like was wildly unfair because I wasn't the one who forgot to invite her. That was his assistant, Pam, had forgotten that. And so I thought her critique of me was unfair. And she said, I feel like our relationship is held together with Scotch tape. And I just thought that was so cruel and so sad because I really felt like I was working 18 hours a day to make her as successful as possible. And I kind of went home and sulked all night and I couldn't sleep. And then around 2 a.m, I realized she was exactly right. She was exactly right. If I had got up and realized that my job in making her the most effective executive she could be was to be that face that eventually would break GChat, because every member of the team saw me as their go-to resource. I got up, I started making relationships, and Pam never forgot Marissa again, because whenever she was organizing this meeting, she would see me in the cafe. I would pop by Pam's desk, see how things were doing. So I think it's a lot of that, especially when you're starting, it's a lot of that relationship building, knowing what's going well in the team and the organization, what are the emerging needs, anticipating those needs, and inserting yourself in places that strategically are really critical. And this is how you learn line upon line. I could ramble on about this for a long time. I'm really passionate about how you build up your expertise and teach people how to utilize you. But I just wanted to share that, sometimes these light bulb moments come from huge mistakes, which I have made many.
I think sadly, we've all made some huge mistakes, but we've learned lessons that we carry with us to this day.
Mm-hmm.
And Amy, let's go to it. You got another one there? I have plenty.
Sure. Unless Bonnie, did you want to speak to that question as well? Or
I just had one thing to add to Anne's brilliant answer. And that is that every assistant I've ever met on the globe is a SME, is a subject matter expert, SME, on at least one thing or many things. And so my message is that even if assistants have been working together for 5-10 years, it doesn't matter. Today's a new day to have that conversation that Anne was just talking about, to say to someone, Anne, I know we've been working together for 10 years, but I realize I really don't know you. And I'd really like to get to know you better. Could we have a cup of coffee? Could we have lunch together? And I strongly believe that's where I believe the future of the workplace is about collaboration. That's what I see. And I see it beginning internally in companies, one-on-one. The fastest way to break down barriers with people who look like you, and especially with people who don't look like you, is to have a one-on-one conversation. And that can happen on Zoom if you have to, but better to share a cup of coffee together.
It's interesting. I think both of you would acknowledge this. I know actually, Bonnie, you went into Campbell after I had left. And I think having a strong and vital and healthy admin network, administrative professional network, is essential. And we were fortunate to have some people like Karen Lewis, who is still there, creating these networks and keeping them alive and well. So there's good conversation and collaboration going on within that admin community, which I think gives everyone a comfort level and a confidence to lean in and contribute a little more. I can't imagine being in a difficult admin job and not being able to have a cup of coffee with people in the organization who are living the same kind of life I was. So, you do that in a lot of companies. I know you help pioneer that work.
That's the beauty of the coming together. The knowledge, the comfort that comes from just knowing you're not alone, that there are lots of challenges and problems, but there's just a great, comfort in knowing I'm just not alone in this, and that there is someone to go to. I mean, Karen Lewis of Campbell's has been brilliant. And so with over 30 years of experience, those who are just new to the organization benefit from knowing them. We hear all this talk about how there's all this competition or conflict between the age groups. And what I say to my students is, let's discard that idea. A person who only has 5 years experience, her move is to go have lunch or a coffee with the Karen Lewises of the world. That's the smart move from where I sit.
Any other thoughts, Anne? Or if not, Amy's got a list, I'm sure.
Well said.
Okay.
No, I think that's beautiful.
I think we have time for one more before we'll invite you both to just give some closing thoughts. We've gotten a question about this every day this week. With emerging technologies now upon us, like artificial intelligence, what are your perspectives related to how AI will shape and disrupt admin and exec assistant roles? We can start with
Anne, you want to take that one?
Sure. I am a tech optimist. I think that being afraid of emerging technologies, leaning out of it, or digging your heels into your current methodologies for being efficient, getting things done is the way to, become the blockbuster of your career. Like you will be disrupted. So why not purposely disrupt yourself? So I say lean into it. I actually think, what's happening in AI right now is the Wild West of the future. But I would become the person known in your organization for knowing how to utilize this emerging technology best. That honestly, this automation stuff, that you can feel threatened by it, or you can realize it's actually going to remove all the boring stuff off your to-do list you don't like to do anyway, and allow you to really shine in the more strategy elements that us humans do best. So I'm very excited about what's happening. I also think we have no idea what's coming around the corner. I'm really, really excited for the opportunities with this tech, but I think over the next year, this conversation will be wildly different. So I encourage you to lean in.
Mhm.
And my comment on that, of course, I agree with Anne. It is about embracing it and not fighting it. Let's all remember how Siri and Alexa were supposed to take everybody's jobs too some years ago, and that didn't happen. They are tools. They are super cool tools. That's what artificial intelligence is. What frustrates me though is I believe some media is irresponsible when they blanketly say that robots are going to be taking over. Yes, that's true in some lower level jobs, it seems to me. But at the C-suite level, in the celebrity world, and they're high-powered executives, leaders out there, human beings want to work with human beings. I asked a question on LinkedIn a week or so ago about, would you pay more to work with a human? And would you be willing to wait in line in order to talk with a human? And the feedback was pretty overwhelming that humans, in most cases, want to work with humans. We want a personal touch. Human beings, that's why going to the movies will never go out of business. I mean, yes, we can watch movies in our house, but we still want to be with each other. Live theater. Human beings want to be with human beings.
Well, thank you. And I would say also, all the derailing studies we have of all these executives, it's always the soft stuff, the relationship stuff that causes the disruption. It's not the analytical AI-driven stuff. It's that they're not collaborating well, they're not working well with the team or the board. It's all the soft stuff. AI is not going to address the soft stuff. They're going to free up our time to deal more in a wiser way with all the soft stuff, which is going to be a benefit to everyone. So it's still going to be, the world is still going to be driven by relationships. And, I'm sorry, but I don't think anybody's going to have a high-powered, productive relationship with an AI being. So I think you're both right. We'd love to get some a closing comment from each of you. And so I'll turn it over to you. Either one. Anne, we'll go with
Okay.
Anne.
Okay. Yeah, what a fun conversation. My brain is buzzing by this, and I love how active the chat has been. And I think that really highlights my favorite part of the administrative professional field is this incredible sense of community and supporting each other. And it's been brought up a couple of times how lonely this role can be. You're often the only one with the responsibilities to access the information that you have. And so I really encourage you to build up 3 levels of support for yourself. I'm stealing this from an article I wrote for CEOs about how to avoid the feeling of being lonely at the top. This directly applies to you as well. The first is build your community within your organization. Find the people with expertise, that you can lean on, that you can go to with quick sanity checks or for commiserating. We all do. Second is build a community outside of your organization so that you can up-level your skills and also be inspired by different methodologies or cultures that are out there. And then the third is start organizing them yourself. When you feel confident you have an expertise or you have a particular niche that you can serve, start to pay that back and pay it forward. And I think if we have a mentor who knows our work well, if we have a sponsor who can open doors for us that we can't get open for ourselves, and we have an avatar mentor, somebody whose career we hope to have 10, 20 years from now, that can give us a guiding light in some of these pivots that can feel a little bit disorienting. And that served me well.
Good. Thank you, Anne. Bonnie, closing thoughts?
Yeah, in 2022, I gave a TEDx talk, and I thought, well, if I'm only going to give one TEDx talk in my whole life, I decided to call it The Real Reasons People Quit. And in it, I talk about the top 4 things that staff all over the world want in order to be successful. And those things are, in this order: respect, feeling respected, feeling like you belong and you're valued for the role you have. You are paid properly, fairly, and you're supported to keep learning and growing with professional development. And they're in that order. Money is number 3. Respect is hands down, no question, the top thing that not only assistants want, but all staff wants. And so my closing message to you, to everyone listening, is that the toxic work environments that are existing in the workplace today, where bullying is present and sexual harassment is present, are destroying companies from the inside out. And leaders would be very smart to get onto it as quickly as possible. We need to pay people properly, because if people are struggling with being preoccupied with how they're going to pay their bills, they cannot possibly be doing great work. So with that, Doug, and I want to thank you, Doug, because Doug, I've had many conversations with you over the years, and you are a leader who gets it, who gets how important your support staff is to not only your success, but to the success of the organization. And so for every leader listening, it is imperative to follow Doug's lead and to truly understand, what is it the people you painstakingly hired in the first place are doing? What is it they're doing right now, which is probably different than what they started out doing several years ago when they were hired? That's the challenge of this next decade, I believe. It's to take a fresh look at all staff and the actual responsibilities and roles that they fill.
Well,
Thank you so
both.
much.
And Bonnie, you said that just the way I wrote it. So thank you for doing that. And all kidding aside, you two are shining lights in a world that needs light. And we're here to support you in any way we can. So thank you for sharing all this with us, and we will get the message out, and we are here for you at any time to help you get your message to more people in a more compelling way. So thank you very much. Now I'm going to turn it back to Amy, who will do the big close.
Yes, I'll just echo what Doug said. Thank you so much to our extraordinary panelists, Anne Hiatt and Bonnie Low-Kramen. Thank you for sharing your time and your insights with us today. Thank you to our host, Doug Conant, and to everyone on the webinar today. I do want to tell you about some exciting ways to engage with Conant Leadership's suite of training and content. But before that, first things first, make sure to thank an administrative professional in your life today or deepen that relationship. Then check out the book Staff Matters and bet on it. There's links in our chat box. Then don't miss tomorrow's Blueprint Leadership Summit session at 12 p.m. Eastern Time. Cynthia Covey-Haller will be joining us to talk about her book, Live Life in Crescendo. Your most important work is always ahead of you. That's going to be a great conversation. Hope you can join us. Next, our signature leadership development program, the Blueprint Bootcamp by Conant Leadership, is a 2-day virtual leadership intensive offering highly interactive training with Doug and a community of your leadership peers, followed by personal mentorship with Doug. We have limited space remaining for our June program, but enrollment is open through the first week in May. If you'd like to explore this transformational tier of leadership development and design your own leadership model in a lively and supportive group learning environment, you can sign up today at ConantLeadership.com/bootcamp, or reach out to Conant Leadership Chief of Staff Mara Katsikis at MARA@ConantLeadership.com. We are offering a special limited time coupon code only for Summit attendees. You can use the code Summit500 at checkout to get $500 off the registration price of our bootcamp. The code expires next week, so act quickly, use that discount spot to reserve your spot. And we're also delighted to announce a forthcoming LinkedIn learning course, Finding Your Leadership Purpose with Doug Conant. This is going to be a step-by-step guide through the process of discovering and articulating your own leadership purpose. A lot of people know purpose is important, but they think it's this nebulous concept. This course is designed for you and is aimed at making it extremely approachable. It is slated to launch in late May on LinkedIn, and it will be free for our community for the first 24 hours. So make sure to keep your eye out for news about that. Finally, you can always find our newsletter and our suite of leadership resources at ConantLeadership.com or at Doug Conant on Twitter and LinkedIn. And you can explore our entire library of past summit sessions with leadership luminaries like Brene Brown, Indra Nooyi, Dan Pink, Hubert Joly, Susan Cain, and many more at ConantLeadership.com/video. If you have any follow-up questions about any of our offerings or our summit today, please reach out to Mara at ConantLeadership.com. We're here to help. Thank you again to Ann Hiatt and Bonnie Low-Kramen. I've been your moderator, Amy Federman, and for our host, Doug Conant, thank you, and we hope to see you tomorrow for our session with Cynthia Covey-Holler. Take care.
Thank you.